Welcome. We are starting today with population and sampling techniques. We are now developing and growing. Yesterday, we had about critical analysis of literature. Today, we are moving to population and sampling techniques. These are the foundations upon which every research project is built. What is a research population? Research population is a well-defined collection of individuals or objects known to have similar characteristics as the main focus and is the main focus of a scientific inquiry. Due to the large sizes of populations, researchers often cannot test every individual as it is too expensive and time-consuming. Hence, the reason for sampling. What is a sample? A sample is simply a subset of the population. A sample must be representative of the population from which it is drawn, and it must have good size to warrant statistical analysis. The sample allows researchers to test individuals from the population so that the results of their study can be used to derive conclusions for the entire population. Types of population. There are two major types of population: the target population and the accessible population. Target population refers to the entire group of individuals or objects to which researchers are interested in generalizing conclusions. Accessible population is the population to which the researcher can apply their conclusions. This population is a subset of the target population and is also known as the study population. Sampling frame, sampling unit, sampling fraction. What are these? Before a sample is taken, members of a study population need to be identified by constructing a list called a sampling frame. And this frame consists of sampling units, which are individuals or groups. The sampling fraction, therefore, is the ratio of the sample size to the study population size. E.g., if you choose 100 customers out of a total of 1,000 coming from a grocery store, then the sampling fraction is 10%. Types of sampling. There are two basic types of sampling: the non-probability and the probability sampling. Non-probability sampling, the choice of the sample group is left to the researcher, and thus it is prone to bias. In probability sampling, the selection of the sample is made using deliberate and biased process so that each sample unit in a group has an equal chance of being selected. This is the basis of random sampling. Probability sampling is commonly used in experimental research. Randomization is performed to choose samples, providing each sample an equal chance of being selected, and thus minimizing or eliminating bias altogether. Sample size. The sample size of a statistical sample is the number of observations that constitute it. Criteria need to be specified to determine the appropriate sample size. And the criteria is as follows. 1, the level of precision. This is also called the sampling error. It is the range in which the true value of the population is estimated to be. This range is expressed in percentage points. E.g., if a researcher finds that 70% of the farmers in the sample have adopted a recommended technology with a precision rate of plus or minus 5%, then the researcher can conclude that between 65% and 75% of the farmers in the population have adopted the new technology. The second criteria is the confidence level. What is confidence level? This confidence level is the statistical measure of the number of times out of 100 that results can be expected to be within a specified range. For example, a confidence interval of 90% means that results of an action will probably meet expectations 90% of the time. If a confidence interval is 95%, it means 95 out of 100 samples will have the true population value within the range of precision. The third criterion for sample size is the degree of variability. Depending upon the target population and the attributes under consideration, the degree of variability varies considerably. The more heterogeneous a population is, the larger the sample size is required to get an optimum level of precision. Determining the sample size. There are a number of approaches to determine the sample size, including using a census for smaller populations, using published tables, imitating a sample size of similar studies, and applying formulas to calculate a sample size. Sampling techniques. Every researcher must know that the ideal scenario is to test all the individuals to obtain a reliable, valid, and accurate results. If testing all the individuals is impossible, that is the only time we rely on sampling techniques. Types of sampling. Now, as we said before, there are two types. There is a non-probability sampling and then the probability sampling techniques. Today, we are going to handle only the non-probability sampling techniques. And then in our next class, we are going to handle the probability sampling techniques. So let's begin with the non-probability sampling techniques. This type of sampling, members of the population do not have equal chance of being selected. Due to this, it is not safe to assume that the sample fully represents the target population. It is also possible that the researcher deliberately chose the individuals that will participate in the study. Non-probability population sampling method is useful for pilot studies for case studies, for qualitative research, and for hypothesis development. If you want to do detailed studies to prove hypotheses and to be representative of the population, then you have to do the probability sampling techniques. The second is that this we are not going to do in detail. Probability sampling techniques is where every individual in the population have equal chance of being selected as a subject for the research. This method guarantees that the selection process is completely randomized without any bias. Probability sampling techniques. The most basic example of probability sampling is the listing of all the names of the individuals or your subject of study in a separate piece of paper, and then drawing a number of papers one by one from the complete collection of names. If the researcher has plenty of time, funds, and workforce, he can opt to conduct the study using a completely randomized sample. But if not, he or she can opt to use convenience sampling. The bottom line is that the type of sampling you use must depend on the research question and the design. So now we'll go in details in the non-probability sampling techniques. We start with convenience sampling. Convenience sampling is a technique where subjects are selected because of their convenient accessibility and proximity to the researcher. One of the most common examples of convenience sampling is using student volunteers as subjects for the research because they are easily accessible to the researcher. The second type of non-probability sampling technique is sequential sampling. This is a non-probability sampling technique whereby the researcher picks a single or a group of subjects in a given time interval, conducts his study, analyzes the results, then picks another group of subjects if needed, and so on and so on. You keep picking until you've gathered a minimum number that you think might be appropriate for your study. Sequential sampling methods. The third type is quarter sampling. It's also a non-probability sampling technique whereby the assembled sample has the same proportions of individuals as the entire population with respect to non-characteristics such as non-characteristics traits or the forecast phenomenon. E.g., to compare the academic performance of different high school class levels, and its relationship with gender and socioeconomic status, the researcher first identifies the subgroups. The subgroup, year 4, year 8, year 9, year 10, year 11, year 12. After that, the researcher divides the entire population into class levels intersected with gender and socioeconomic status. Then he takes note of the proportions of these subgroups in the entire population, and then samples this subgroup accordingly. Quarter sampling. Then the fourth type is judgmental sampling. This is a sampling technique where the researcher selects units to be sampled based on their knowledge and professional judgment. This type of sampling technique is also called purposive sampling or authoritative sampling. Example, to know what it takes to graduate with first class, you need to sample those who have got first class. Otherwise, you cannot ask somebody who has not got first class what it takes to get the first class. Snowball sampling. This is a fifth non-probability sampling technique. Snowball sampling is a non-probability sampling technique that is used by researchers to identify potential subjects in studies where subjects are hard to locate. This type of sampling technique works like a chain referral. After observing the initial subject, the researcher asks for assistance from the subject to help identify people with a similar trait